Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Greg Brownderville Dimension. I'm your host, Greg Brownderville, and this is episode 0 of the podcast, by which I mean it's not going to be a full episode, but it's the very first piece of content I'm doing for the show, and it's just going to be a quick introduction to what we're going to be doing here, and I'll tell you a little bit about me. This is a podcast about the magic of language. I love words. I've always been obsessed with language, and I've basically built my life around it. I'm a poet. I have 3 books of poetry published, and I'm the creator of an online narrative series called Firebones, which you can find at firebones.org. And I'm a musician and songwriter. I'm in a band called Beekeeper Spaceman. Our debut album is coming out in the spring. I love to think about song lyrics and to write song lyrics. I'm also the editor-in-chief of a literary magazine called Southwest Review, and I'm a professor of English and creative writing at SMU in Dallas. So that's a little bit about me. And I guess I should say, if you're picking up on the Southern accent, I'm originally from Pumpkin Bend, Arkansas. So even though I live in Dallas now, still got that Pumpkin Bend accent. I have this idea that so much of our lives happens in words. You're constantly having a conversation with yourself, and you're having conversations with other people. And these conversations are, in some ways, creating your life. Because what happens is one thing, but the story that you tell yourself about what happens is something different, and it can radically change the way you feel about the facts. If you can raise the quality of the conversation, the aesthetic quality of the conversation you're having with yourself and the aesthetic quality of the conversations you're having with other people, you're going to raise the quality of your life. You're going to have a more meaningful and more pleasurable life. And so that's really what the podcast is about. I want to look at language that delights us in, everything from street corner conversations to text messages to stuff we see online. And of course, I will talk about poems and song lyrics and stories, just any place I encounter language that I think is worth talking about. And there's a lot of it. I'm not a snob about that. I find language that delights me all over the place. And that's really what the podcast is going to be. I was thinking the other day about how the holidays are coming up. And a few years back, I texted my good buddy, Alex Taylor, who's a fiction writer and a really good fiction writer. He's just a beautiful sentence writer and tells amazing stories. Such a joy to have a friend like Alex who is just helplessly poetic. I mean, there's nothing he can do about it. If he tried to be boring and kind of drab, he couldn't. So I texted him and I said, well, what you up to today, Alex? And this was about this, it was a little later in the year. It was a little closer to Christmas, but in this general season. And he said, out Christmas shopping, I have come to the conclusion this country is done for. And I said, what are you seeing? And he said, general malaise, gawking. These are text messages, y'all. He says, general malaise, gawking droolers, jean-clad and florid, gaudy wives, and aghast husbands clutching scented candles. We are done for. So I thought, this is an amazing text message. Well, I remembered that because it was so striking and interesting. My favorite part was aghast husbands clutching scented candles. And I wound up putting this in a poem, which you can find in my book, A Horse with Holes in It, if you're interested in this. This is a poem called The Homemade Fireworks, or maybe it's just Homemade Fireworks. I forget the title of my own poem, but it's towards the end of that book. That text message wound up playing kind of a prominent role in this poem. And I was thinking about this poem by the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, who, as anybody who knows me knows, is a hero of mine and just a favorite poet of mine. This poem is called Vacillation, and in the poem, he's in a shop in London. And all of a sudden, he has this moment in which he's overtaken with wonder. And this can happen to you, I mean, you can be out somewhere with a bunch of people, folks all around, and maybe most people are just kind of having a mundane moment, nothing noteworthy, but something happens inside you, and you have this feeling that the moment is particularly beautiful or interesting or freighted with meaning, something. And this seems to have happened to the speaker in this poem. And he writes this: "My 50th year had come and gone. I sat, a solitary man, in a crowded London shop, an open book, an empty cup on the marble tabletop. While on the shop and street I gazed, my body of a sudden blazed, and 20 minutes more or less it seemed, so great my happiness, that I was blessed and could bless." I was talking about this very kind of moment with a friend of mine, Tim Cassidy, who's a fantastic writer and scholar. I highly recommend his book, Figures of Speech. And we were discussing this, and he said this thing that I found this is another example of just how people can just say something off the cuff that really will matter to you and stick with you. He said, "You're right, Greg. The poem is the perfect technology for keeping these moments that matter to us, keeping them, not letting them just slip away." And I thought about this as something that can happen on the page. I mean, Yeats committed this to writing, and now we can keep that moment. Not only can the speaker in the poem keep it, we can keep it. But even if you never commit it to writing, just saying something interesting to yourself or memorable or beautiful in the privacy of your own imagination about something that's happening to you can make the moment more keepable. And if you think about that over the course of a lifetime, just imagine the difference that makes in your life. This podcast is going to be about how language can matter like that. And I hope you'll join me for episode 1. Thanks for being here for episode 0 of the Greg Brownderville Dimension.